right, don't let the handshake fool you. I still feel like this was a setup. I talked about this to my friends last week. Let's make Andrew worry about following up Dr. Loritz. That only seems fair, right? Oh, man. Could have been worse. I could have got Proverbs 5. Anyway, Crawford Loritz, I've been thinking about some of the messages that we learned last week, just kind of repeating in my head over and over again. And one of them actually ties into the passage this week very well, so I wanted to just bring that up again. And I don't remember exactly what the words were, but he said something to the effect of, "Nothing we do for the advancement of the kingdom will go without opposition from the evil one." And it's almost as if we expect for the work of the Lord to go without any sort of bumps in the road, but that's just not a realistic approach, because if it's bringing people to the kingdom and helping us to grow spiritually, then chances are Satan is going to have something to say about that. And we cannot judge the success of the task that we have been charged with based on how smoothly the task went for that very reason. And so this calls to mind the idea of perseverance and thinking ahead in what we do and how we work, being diligent, being self-motivated. All of these things need to be true of us as we complete these tasks that the Lord has set ahead of us. And so with that in mind, I'd like to invite you to turn in your Bibles to Proverbs chapter 6. We're going to be looking at verses 6 through 11 today. And as you do, I would like to read you the lyrics of a song. "Go to the ant, observe her, see how she works all day. And she doesn't even have a captain to tell her what to do, but she works hard anyway. Go to the ant and listen. Tell me, does she complain? She is God's illustration of organization. Go to the ant. Are you the thoughtful kind? Do you ever ask what you can do to help your mother, or do you complain and whine? And you lie around and hope that she will ask your brother. Well, there was a poor, irresponsible sluggard who slept when there was work to be done. But too late, he realized his foolish behavior, and poverty hit him like a man with a gun. Go to the ant, O sluggard." This is a song that we had on a cassette tape driving around. I think it was the Ford, because that's the only one that had like the cassette player in it that I can remember. After that, the vans all ditched the cassette tapes. But this is a song by Judy Rogers that we listened to going pretty much anywhere. And turns out this wasn't just parental propaganda trying to get me to do my chores without complaining or hoping she would ask Philip or something. Turns out this is actually really good life advice. So this is, of course, a song that was pulled from this passage, Proverbs 6 to 11. So let's actually read it from the passage. Verses 6 through 11. "Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man." This passage, I was talking to Elijah. We talk about a lot of things, but I was talking to Elijah about this passage in early in the week as I was developing this, and telling him it was a bit of a challenge because it seems so simple. Just work hard. And if you work hard and you have a steady job, or you don't show up late, you don't call out sick, it almost seems like, all right, next. What's the next verse have to say? And it was kind of a challenge to reel myself in and try to understand, what does this passage mean, and what do we stand to learn and to gain as busy people who chances are probably already work very hard in order to make ends meet? What is there to learn from this? Life in America is incredibly busy. And I think especially in this day and age, we are probably some of the busiest people that really have ever lived, and this isn't necessarily a good thing. Think about some things that could be said of growing up and living and working in America today. The access to information has made us restless because at our fingertips, there's so much information available. We're always gathering information. And it's just we're being inundated with information from everywhere. That does make us restless people. Social media then gives everyone a platform to share that information with the world, for better or for worse. And then wealth is easily accessible in a land of opportunity. So now we can take that information that we have, we can take our platforms, we can use it, and it could be so easy to spend our life trying to work really hard in order to accumulate wealth because there is so much opportunity for that. So we are always gathering, always expressing, and always working. Not everyone, but a lot of us. And here's what this passage in learning the character traits of the ants really showed me this week as I was preparing. Even a busy person can be a sluggard. It depends what the busy person is doing. And so if, like me, who read through this passage and said, okay, go to the ant, let's consider her ways, be wise, no chief or officer great, gathers bread. All right, I gather bread. I work, it's so easy to just check it off and say, yep, okay, done that, what's next? Our busy lifestyles do not necessarily mean that we are demonstrating what it means to be a good worker in Christ. Not necessarily. So what lessons are there to be learned in this passage for somebody with a steady full-time job, or a single parent working 2 jobs, or a student athlete who devotes a lot of time to getting good grades, but also is trying to excel at a certain sport or multiple sports? People who work really hard. What is there to learn? There are 3, again, there are more than 3 things to learn, but there are 3 things that I identified that I think the ant will teach us this morning. And that is, number 1, the importance of self-driven diligence. Self-driven diligence. 2 is identifying the specific work that we have been called to complete. And then, of course, finally would be the dangers of being a sluggard. Those are the 3 things that we're going to examine today. This passage is a little bit depressing because Solomon, in all of his God-given wisdom, says, my son, you can learn a thing or two from the most beautiful and awe-inspiring of God's creatures, the ant. Not the unicorn, the ant. Solomon says, go to the ant, you sluggard. And I'm sitting here, go to the ant and squish him, see how he crawls all over my food. Like, the ant is just is the least inspiring thing. There are so many ants, millions and millions of ants. I heard this statistic. I don't know where it came from, so I hope that this is factual, but it's estimated, how could you even prove this anyway? There are so many ants in the world, it's estimated that if you took the total weight of all the people, all 7 or 8 billion of us, however many there are, and the total weight of all the ants and put them together, it's actually a pretty similar number. There are so many ants, billions and billions and billions of those little creatures around here. But the thing that is inspiring about this creature isn't necessarily the appearance of it, but the fact that the Lord gave us glimpses into his own nature and image in his creation, including the ant. Romans 1:18-20 says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. How has he shown it to them? His invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly perceived. How or where? Ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. The ant included. We see pictures of God's character and design in the things he made. That's why when you turn on the radio and you hear somebody, there are some artists who just instantly, you know who that is. Just from the first note, that's who's singing. And you can see some of the personality and qualities and characteristics of these musicians in the songs that they sing. And it's similar in the sense that God left the world subtle clues about his own nature in the things that he made. So what are some of those qualities or characteristics in the ant that we can learn from? So the importance of self-driven diligence. The diligent do not need external motivators to get to work. The diligent do not need external motivators to stay on task. The ant does not need a reward or some kind of incentive in order to get busy. The ant just works anyway. And motivators are good, but the reason we can't rely on those motivators is because they're not always present. And sometimes the job still needs to be done in the absence of the motivators. So if we have programmed our whole work ethic around, I'm going to work when I get something out of it, or I'm going to work when I get this immediate gratification, that's not something that we can really rely on. It's not concrete because sometimes work needs to be done in the absence of a motivator. So what are some motivators? Rewards. If you do this, I will give you this. If you behave, then you will get this. Or praise. It's easy to work when everyone sees your work, and at the end, wow, you made that? That's incredible. But what if no one's around to see it, and we're not going to get that praise for the work? Do we still have enough motivation to complete the task? Or fun. Maybe this work, once you're done, now you get to enjoy it, and it's going to give you some good fun with your friends. Maybe you built something and a Gaga pit, and you're going to play some sports or something. Maybe there's some fun to get out of it. Or maybe it's just the community. I mean, it's easy to work when you're working with people. This is my biggest thing. Painting is just so meticulous, but when I'm painting with other people, I don't mind it at all. It's a great opportunity to build relationships, but am I still motivated to paint for hours and hours and hours if it's me in an empty room? The mark of a good worker is doing work without those extra motivators. And here's another one. The mark of a good worker is doing work without being commanded to do so. The ant wasn't told, go here, gather this, bring it back, store it up. The ant just goes without any captain in order to tell the ant what to do. The ant won't stray off task when no one else is around because it doesn't have a captain anyway. Working at a lot of different types of jobs, I think food service is the worst one for this kind of thing where, everyone kind of sits back and on the phone and then boss walks in the room and it's like, whoosh, and it's incredible how that works. But can you work alone with the same quality that you would give if the boss was in the room watching? That cannot be said for everyone. I'm guilty of this too. I feel like this is something at some point in our lives everybody must deal with at some point. Here's another one. The ant looks into the future and starts preparing for disaster before disaster comes. The ant is not necessarily always reacting to things as they happen. The ant prepares ahead of time. It's foresight. It's being proactive in addressing problems before they arrive. Because a lot of times, once the problem arrives, it's too late. Or the solution is going to be much more difficult and costly than if we had done it before the problem arose. In contrast, the sloth or the sluggard or the couch potato or the son of a couch potato, tater tots, I don't know, only works hard when driven by someone or by something else. And that's not a trustworthy worker. That's not someone that is going to be an employer's first choice to do a job. The person who only works when driven by somebody else. Because an employer needs to entrust you with a task knowing you're going to complete it to the best of your ability, whether they're standing there and watching you or not. People can be forced to work. We've seen this throughout all of our history. People have been forced to work and punished if they don't, but that's not the relationship that we have with our Lord Jesus Christ. At least that shouldn't be the way that we view it. We shouldn't look at the Lord's work as you're going to have to make me. That Moses tried this. We looked at the passage with Dr. Loritz on Saturday about how Moses gave all these excuses and reasons why he wasn't the ant for the job. But the Lord said, no, we're going to do this. I'm going to be with you, and let's get to work. I think it's important to also establish this on the topic of self-driven work and diligence, is that self-drive does not diminish the need for leadership. In other words, it doesn't mean that because I am so self-motivated, I don't need a captain anymore, because leadership is still important. But what it does do is it elevates the importance of faithfulness. The captain gave us our marching orders. Are we being faithful to the command that we've been given? Just because the ant doesn't have a captain doesn't mean that captains are bad. So the second thing is the specific work we are called to complete. Because in order to work at that task with this self-motivation, this self-drive, we have to identify the specific jobs that we have been given so that we can complete it to the best of our abilities. I think there are many, way too many to cover, way too many than we even need to mention, but I will just try to narrow it down to two categories: physical work and spiritual work. The physical work would be things like 9-to-5 jobs, our responsibilities that we have around the house and this and that and everything else. Spiritual tasks have been given to us in His Word. We'll look at a couple of the major ones in a few minutes here. But on the topic of work, here's a motivator that will always be there. Work is not bad. And the reason we can prove this, even though a lot of work feels pretty bad, work was created and designed by God in the beginning as something that we ought to do. God gave Adam tasks before the fall that He expected Adam to complete to the best of his ability, with Eve as his helper. So work is not bad. Nothing that God created that was in existence in that garden is bad. The exception is our own sin corrupted it, and now the game has changed. Genesis chapter 3, verse 17 through 19. And to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So work is not bad, but work became somewhat of a drag if we let it, because sin corrupted it. So now we have to labor over our work. It's not that the work or the action of working is bad. It's that it became a lot more difficult than it needed to be. And therefore, we seem to think that things that are hard must be bad because it's difficult. Work can actually be restful in the sense that when we've completed the work, we get to take a step back and look at the thing that we have completed, knowing we did it to the best of our ability, and we can rest in that. We can be satisfied in that. And even as we are working, we can still rest in our working because we know that we are fulfilling the calling to complete this task that we have. And that can motivate us to rest in the work. Not just rest after the work, rest in the process of working. But in our society, of course, our standards have been lowered so much, we've just been given a free pass to be lazy everywhere. And it's not just on the workforce, it's in schools too. I mean, just pushing people through instead of holding people to a standard, just continuing to drop the standard. It's a problem everywhere. We've given people passes to be lazy. And of course, some people need additional help, and the Lord told us to give to those people generously with a cheerful heart. So that's not even the point that I'm making here. The point is, no able-bodied person should be paid to sit around and do nothing all day, or enabled to sit around and do nothing all day because mom and dad let them sit in the basement doing whatever because their bills are being paid by mom and dad who enable them to sit around and do. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. We'll take a look at more of those consequences later, but let's take a look at spiritual work. 2 Timothy 2:15, permanently burned into the deep parts of my brain for all history. Right, Awana Commander? Because we said this verse every single week, and now you're a commander, you get to do it all over again. 2 Timothy 2:15, and you can't just read, you have to, 2 Timothy 2:15, right? Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed. Why? Rightly handling the word of truth. That is one task that the Lord has entrusted to us. Here is my word. Handle it rightly. I watch on YouTube or TV or all these different places these nonsensical sermons that people give, which are nothing more than motivational speeches, and then maybe we'll throw in a verse if you're lucky. Maybe you have to catch the Wednesday night service for that. Not sure. But I have to wonder if the weight of responsibility, the Lord handed us his word. And how dare we misrepresent what he said to us for some sort of personal gain. Handle the word of truth rightly so that come judgment day we have no need to be ashamed. The word that we were entrusted was handled properly. We have done our very best to present ourselves to the Lord as a worker who has no need to be ashamed. And hopefully when we get there, the Lord will say, approved, well done, my good and faithful servant. God has given us spiritual tasks to complete as a church until he returns. And there are many responsibilities that the church has, and from my understanding, some churches, I think, maybe prioritize some over others, or maybe different strengths and weaknesses. There are a lot of different strategies, I guess, to how we complete all of these things at the same time, because it's a list. But I'll just mention two very important ones. Three, actually, very important ones. Evangelism. Go, therefore, into all the world and preach the gospel. Make disciples of all nations. That's huge. Discipleship. Continue to sharpen each other and to study his word and to preach and worship. Those are three spiritual tasks that we have been given to complete as a church until he returns, until the master comes back to check up on how we have been doing. Luke 10, verse 2. He told them, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. There is no shortage of work to be done. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. It's amazing how all of these speakers and all these messages all have somehow connected. Pastor Jimmy Van Sant, a few months ago, preached a message on this very passage. We've been commissioned to work our master's fields, to cultivate relationships with people who are lost in this world, and to go out into the harvest and reap. So these are two categories, our physical work and our spiritual work, and both of them need to be completed with diligence. But to be successful, we have to pursue both of them. And I think the danger is, as we'll examine in a couple of minutes here, a lot of times the temptation can be to pursue one with our whole heart and leave the other one completely neglected, which is why I said at the beginning, a busy person can still be a sluggard. Because if we pursue our 9 to 5 with all passion and intensity, and we completely neglect the spiritual work that the Lord has called us to do, he will not tell us when we stand there and answer for the things we've done. He will not tell us, good and faithful servant, because we made it to the top of the career ladder and did nothing for the kingdom of heaven. The parable of the talents, which we read this morning as the call to worship, I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but just to summarize this, Jesus explains with this parable that the master is going on a journey, and it's the understanding he's going to be gone for a while, but he will be coming back. So to one of his servants, he gave 5 talents. It's difficult to pin down exactly how much money this really is, but a talent is much, much, much more than a shekel. So much so that 5 talents is possibly thousands and thousands of dollars. And some scholars have even gone as far as to say, maybe that giving somebody 5 talents made them for a time a millionaire, but more conservative estimates are much less than that. But when you look this up and try to get good information and they tell you it was anywhere from 1,000 to 1,000,000, it's like, thank you. That really narrows it down. Anyway, let's just be assured, it's a huge sum of money. Regardless, it's a lot of money to hand over to a servant to take care of. Whether it's $1,000 or $1,000,000, if somebody hands it to me and says, steward this until I come back for it, I would be horrified if there was 1 penny missing from that when he came back. So it doesn't necessarily matter what the dollar value is. He entrusted this servant a small fortune. What are you going to do with it? So Jesus explains that one servant was given 5 talents, the other handed 2, and the other was given 1. And after a period of time had passed, the master returns. How much time was he gone for? We don't know, but it was long enough that he expected that they would have done something with that money by the time he came back. Each servant doubled their money, except for the one who was given 1 talent, who instead buried it in the ground. To those who multiplied what they were given, they were called good and faithful servants. But how does the master address the one that saved what he had? Very puzzling for me, because if I gave somebody one of my talents and said, here, I'll be back, and that person gave it back to me, I would be pretty happy. I didn't lose anything. You didn't spend it somewhere. It's still safe. It's protected. You thought to put it somewhere underground. You didn't forget where you buried it. I got the talent back. It's so shocking what the response is. How does the master address the one who saved what he had but did not go out and steward it properly? Wicked and slothful. He returned exactly what the Lord had entrusted to him, but the master handed him the talents with the expectation that he would do more than return what was entrusted to him. What resources, and I've been thinking about this a lot in the last couple of months or years, what types of resources has the Lord given us as a church? What has he entrusted to us? Or even as individuals, what has the Lord given me to work with? And what have I done with those resources that he's given me? So I'll give you an example. During COVID times, back in last April, was it? I don't know, when the schools shut down for a couple weeks, and then we made it to summer, and I was teaching at Faith at that point, so I had a summer off with virtually nothing to do with it. He gave me an excess of time, and I'm afraid that I took the time and I stuffed it in the ground and I buried it there, and I wouldn't say that I necessarily wasted it, because I didn't sit around and just, watch TV all day. But did I really make the most use of that time? Probably not. Has he given an excess of talents? Not the money talents. Now I'm talking about talents as far as gifts and skills and abilities. Has he given you an excess of talent? Has he given you an excess of money? Spiritually speaking, what resources has the Lord given to you? All that extra time, and one of my goals for a while has been just I want to write and record some music just because I love to see an idea be turned into a physical song that I can play and listen to. I just think that's really neat. I could have used that summer to produce some of that, but the summer came and went and it was gone. It's incredible how fast that goes. So yes, on some of those COVID days, I took my extra time, I stuck it in the ground, and I buried it. On others, I took that free time and I turned a profit on what the Lord gave to me. I turned a profit and I gave it back. Sometimes, in order to take something that the Lord has entrusted to us, multiply it, and give it back, that requires taking risks. And I'm sure one of the reasons why the servant with one talent stuck it in the ground is he was too afraid to take the risk, because it could be doubled, but I could lose it. And what am I going to do when the master comes back then? And I have nothing to show for what he gave me. Sometimes the work or the tasks that the Lord has called us to do requires that we take a risk. Think of all the ant has to worry about. Think of what a risk it is for that ant to leave its hill. It could be stepped on. It could be eaten by some other predator. It could be weed whacked. It could be pulverized by your foot. Anything could happen to this ant, which can do virtually nothing to save itself from people like us. But that does not stop that ant from going out there. The average lifespan, too, why do I know so much about ants? I guess the queens can live for like 30, 40 years, but the average lifespan for those workers is 30 days. And it's probably for reasons like this. It is willing to risk it all to go out there and complete the work that needs to be done. So that queen just keeps cranking out workers to go out there and get whatever. Are God's directives given in his word, the tasks that he's given us, handle my word properly, go out into the world and make disciples, dedicate yourself to the gathering of believers, do not forsake that gathering? Are those directives put on hold because it's not safe to really do that anymore? What kind of persecution and horrible work environment, work conditions has the church had to deal with in its history? Between Nero's persecution, the threat of being burned alive at the stake, the threat of being thrown into a Roman Colosseum and being ripped apart, the threat of the Pharisees who are supposed to be on your team hunting you down and dragging you out into the streets to be stoned. I mean, when has the threat to our own safety ever stopped the church from diligently working to complete the tasks that God has given us? Enter COVID-19, and suddenly so many people just put all that on hold for a time. And I wonder what the master's going to have to say about that when he comes back to check on our progress. So now to the dangers, quickly. It's pretty simple. A little bit of sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, and what's going to happen to us? Poverty will hit us in an instant. We won't even know what happened. So poverty, being poor, those are all definitely consequences of slothfulness. What happens if we don't pursue our spiritual work, though? The Lord's work doesn't stop. So if we're not going to get busy, he may just choose to complete that task with another ant. Moses was frustrated wandering around in the wilderness waiting to go to the promised land, and these people wouldn't stop complaining, so he expresses his anger, strikes the rock. The Lord decides, I'm going to do this with another ant. Joshua is the one who ended up ultimately, after everything that Moses had been through with those people, it was Joshua that took him across the finish line. he might just choose to move forward with somebody else. Sometimes it's supernatural patience, unlike anything that we can see from a human being, where despite David's weaknesses, he allowed him to maintain the throne of Israel and gave him a long and prosperous life. But he may just choose to move forward with somebody else. Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli the priest back in 1 Samuel, really could have been a huge help to their father in completing the tasks that they were given at the temple, but instead they made a fool of themselves, a fool of the whole family, got themselves killed, got the Ark of the Covenant stolen, and when their father heard about it, he fell off the back of his chair, broke his neck, and died. Here's an opportunity for them to go to the temple and to give, but instead they went to the temple and they just had their own selfish gains in mind. Gordon Dahl once said, quote, most middle-class Americans tend to, quote, worship our work at our play, and play at our worship. And it's the last one that's the most terrifying, even though all of those are bad. We shouldn't be worshiping our work and giving that priority over the spiritual work that God has given us. We definitely shouldn't be working at our play, because sometimes that, even the Lord took the seventh day as a rest, and sometimes in that play, I think the family maybe is the one that suffers the most, because when we bring the work home and miss out on the opportunities that we have to cultivate those relationships, it's the family that ends up suffering, and we absolutely should not defile our worship with play. Every single one of those things is damaging. What happens, finally, as we close? What happens if we pursue one task at the expense of another? What happens if we pursue our physical work ahead of our spiritual work? The Bible warns against this. 1 Timothy 6:10, for the love of money, because ultimately, why do we work? The love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. Money is not evil. The master gave the talents. He expected them to work. The love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have what? Wandered away from the faith. Think about what happens when we enter into the presence of God, when we are worshiping him forever in eternity. Who will we be standing there with? We'll have Job. At one point in time, the wealthiest person in the known world. We'll be standing there with also Abraham, another extraordinarily wealthy person. We will also be sitting there with the widow who gave her last 2 coins to the temple's treasury. Nothing about what we accomplished and the amount of money we accumulated on this earth is going to mean anything when we're all standing there with our new bodies glorifying the Lord for all eternity. There's a reason why wealthy people with a strong relationship with the Lord are the exceptions in Scripture. It's not that it can't be done to have an excess of wealth and to maintain a proper relationship with Christ, but there's a reason why that's the exception, and this is what I think it is. What was sacrificed, what was given in order to accumulate that? And was it the spiritual health of you and our families that suffered because of our physical work? We cannot pursue our physical work at the expense of the spiritual tasks that we have been commissioned by God to carry out. The New Living Translation says this: take a lesson from the ants, you lazy bones. Learn from their ways and become wise. You lazy bones. Learn from their ways and be wise. So maybe looking at the calluses on my man hands, I might think to myself, that little ant should be taking notes from me. But notice in that passage, it was never about the completion of the task. Look at the passage again. That poor ant never finished working. Isn't that something? Prepares, not prepared. Gathers, not gathered. The ant never finished gathering. The ant never stopped working. It's not about the completion of the task. Look at how amazing this ant is. Look at what the ant built. Look at what the ant did. It's not about what the ant did. It's about what the ant is. It's the fact that the ant can gather and work and labor with no master, staying on task with all the self-drive in the world. It's not about the completion of the task. So, to close, which I said I was closing 3 times already, but this one is for real. We aren't being called to imitate the task of the ant. This is not a call to work. This is not a call to be busy. This is not a call to busy ourselves. This is more than that. This is a call to imitate the ant's ethic and to continue to complete the Lord's work until he returns, so that when he does, he will look at us one day and say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a workman who has no need to be ashamed, correctly handling the word of truth. 2 Timothy 2:15. I was supposed to say the big idea at the beginning, and I totally forgot. Sorry. Christian, you still with me there, buddy? Here's the big idea. You ready? Do we have it up there by chance? There it is. Christian, you know your Awana theme verse? 2 Timothy 2:15. You know it? The busy ant shows us how to be a good, what do you think? Worker. Good job, buddy. Put you on the spot there. Thank you for helping me. Well done, good and faithful servant. Let's bow our heads and pray. Lord, I thank you so much for the opportunity that we have to honor you with our work. And I just pray that you would continue to just bless this church as best as we can, try to complete the tasks that you have given to us before you return, that we would be diligent to answer the call for evangelism, that we would be diligent to answer the call to correctly handle your word. I pray that this church would always correctly handle your word. And I just pray that we wouldn't get bogged down with the things that we see as important, our work, but that we would see your work as infinitely more important. I pray that we would never sacrifice your work for our work and the things that we think are important. I pray that we would never sacrifice something with eternal value for something temporary. And I pray that our worship this morning would be honoring and glorifying to you, that the songs that we sing would be heartfelt and not just words on a page. We pray and ask these things in your name. Amen.